For nearly 40 years, Harold and Martha Ellison called their little brick house on Birch Avenue home. Then, one morning, a letter arrived, a notice giving them 10 days to leave. What followed was a storm of loss, greed, and unexpected grace as their 3 children fought to bring them home again. This story will break your heart and mend it in the same breath. If you believe in second chances and the power of family, stay until the end. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who still believes in hope. Morning sun filtered through the lace curtains Martha had sewn decades ago, scattering light across the kitchen tiles. Outside, the maple trees were still dripping from last night's rain, and a soft wind carried the smell of wet soil and coffee grounds. Harold, her husband of 41 years, sat in his worn wheelchair near the window, tracing a finger along the rim of his mug, as if the warmth might seep into his bones. "You're quiet this morning," Martha said gently, setting down a plate of toast. Her voice held the fragile steadiness of habit. Harold looked up, his pale blue eyes soft but unfocused. "Just thinking," he murmured, "about the garden. The tomatoes didn't come up this year." "It's the soil," she replied, pouring his coffee. "Too much rain." He nodded, though she knew it wasn't the soil he was thinking about. There was a heaviness between them that had nothing to do with the weather. The years had been kind in small ways, no disasters, no scandals, but time had quietly taken its due, his health, her energy, and lately their sense of safety. The house on Birch Avenue had once been filled with noise, 3 children running through hallways, slamming doors, laughter ricocheting off the walls. Lydia, Mark, and June, each of them, had been a miracle adopted when the Ellisons were still young enough to chase dreams and strong enough to fight for them. Those children were adults now, scattered across the country. They called on holidays, sent cards at Christmas. It was enough to feel remembered, but not quite enough to feel seen. Martha didn't resent them. Life had its rhythm. Still, she wished one of them might drop by on an ordinary Tuesday just to see if she needed help changing the porch light. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. 7:12 a.m. She walked to the front door to pick up last evening's mail slippers, whispering across the linoleum. The air was sharp and smelled faintly of damp pine. In the metal mailbox sat a handful of envelopes, 2 advertisements, 1 medical bill, and a thick white envelope stamped in red final notice. Her stomach tightened. Not again, she whispered, though she knew it wasn't a mistake. She carried it inside, set it beside the coffee pot, and stared. Harold's gaze followed her. "Bill?" he asked. She forced a smile. "Just some papers? I'll look at it later." She tucked the envelope under the old Better Homes and Gardens cookbook, the one with the torn spine and jam stains from when Lydia was learning to bake. She told herself she'd deal with it after breakfast. But the sight of it lingered in her mind like a low hum she couldn't silence. "The coffee's strong today," Harold said, breaking the quiet. "Just how you like it," she replied. The radio played softly in the background, old country songs, the kind that used to fill the car on family trips. She turned up the volume a little, hoping to drown the thought that their rent was due in 3 days, and the retirement checks were already thin. After breakfast, she wheeled Harold to the small sunroom where his tools were neatly arranged, remnants of his life as an aircraft mechanic. His hands, once steady and capable, trembled now as he polished an old wrench for no reason other than habit. Martha watched him for a moment. "Do you ever think about moving somewhere smaller?" she asked quietly. He paused, the cloth frozen mid-wipe. "This is smaller," he said simply. "Any smaller, and we'd vanish." His words stayed with her. She went back to the kitchen, lifted the cookbook, and slid out the envelope. It was heavier than she expected. Her name and Harold's were printed neatly above the address. Inside was a letter from Silver Pine Holdings, a name she didn't recognize. She read the first line, and her knees weakened. "Effective immediately, your tenancy at 217 Birch Avenue will terminate in 10 days. The property has been sold to Silver Pine Holdings as part of the Cedar Falls redevelopment project. We thank you for your cooperation. 10 days. She gripped the counter to steady herself. Her reflection in the microwave looked older than she felt, lined, pale, frightened. 10 days, she whispered again, the words barely making it past her throat. Martha Harold's voice came from the sunroom. "Everything okay?" She took a deep breath, folded the paper, and slid it back into the envelope. "It's fine," she called. "Just another ad." She slipped it into the drawer between old utility bills and grocery lists and closed it softly, as if quiet could make it less true. The sun had risen higher, but it brought no warmth. For a moment, Martha thought she heard the faint sound of a hammer striking wood from a few houses away, the beginning perhaps of someone else's new dream. She turned off the radio, leaned against the counter, and let herself exhale. The kitchen clock ticked on mercilessly steady. In 10 days, everything they'd built 40 years of small joys, losses, dinners, birthdays, quiet nights would no longer belong to them. And yet she didn't tell Harold. Not yet. He had enough shadows to carry. She straightened the lace curtains, adjusted the vase of wilted daisies, and whispered to herself, just one more ordinary morning. But deep down she knew the morning was already gone. The letter lay flat on the table, now smoothed by Martha's hands until the creases disappeared. She had read it a dozen times since breakfast, each word burrowing deeper, as if repetition might somehow undo its meaning. The kitchen felt smaller, with it sitting there, the sunlight harsher, every sound too sharp. Harold was still in the sunroom, humming faintly to the radio, while sorting his old bolts and screws into mismatched jars. Martha wished she could stay in that sound, a man content a home undisturbed, but the letter's weight kept dragging her back to the table. She picked up the phone and dialed the number listed at the bottom of the page, Silver Pine Holdings Tenant Relations. A recorded voice answered first, bright and impersonal. She waited through 3 transfers before a young woman came on the line. "Termination notice," the woman repeated, her tone brisk. "Yes, ma'am, your property was part of a redevelopment purchase. You'll need to vacate within 10 days. Martha's voice trembled. 10 days. We've lived here 39 years. There must be a mistake. The woman sighed, the sound of typing filling the pause. "No mistake, ma'am. Rent increase notices were sent last month. You didn't respond. We never received one." Martha said quickly, heart pounding. "It must have been lost in the mail. I'm sorry, but the system shows confirmed delivery." And then, as if it explained everything, she added, "It's just business." The line went dead before Martha could find her breath again. She sat very still, the receiver warm against her ear until the dial tone grew loud enough to make her flinch. When she finally returned to the sunroom, Harold looked up. "You've gone pale," he said. "Bad news." She hesitated, the truth clawing at her throat. "The rent's going up," she said at last. "How much a lot?" He studied her face. "How much, Martha?" She forced the words out, almost double. His jaw tightened. "Then we fight it." She shook her head. "I've already called. There's nothing to fight. They own the property now." Harold wheeled closer, his hand gripping the armrest so tightly the veins stood out. "We can't just roll over. We'll use the savings." "That's for your medication," she reminded him softly. "And the car insurance. And winter heating. We can't drain it, Harold." His eyes hardened with the stubborn pride she'd fallen in love with decades ago, the same man who once rebuilt an engine in their driveway through a snowstorm because he refused to give up. "Then we'll find another way," he said. She tried to smile, but couldn't. "I'll make some calls." The next 2 days blurred into a series of phone calls, waiting music and scripted sympathy. Legal aid told her their list was 6 months long. The Senior Advocacy Center said the same. Even Pastor Green at the church, kind as always, could only offer prayer and a promise to see what donations might come through. By Wednesday afternoon, Martha's voice was raw from explaining their story, her notepad filled with disconnected phone numbers and crossed-out names. Each "I'm sorry" felt like another door closing. That evening, Harold sat by the window, the setting sun drawing thin gold lines across his face. "Remember when we moved in here?" he asked suddenly. "You painted that wall yellow. You said the color made it feel like morning." She nodded, swallowing hard. "I wanted it to feel like hope." "Still does," he murmured, though neither believed it. After dinner, she took the letter out again, this time reading it aloud to herself under the soft lamp glow. Every legal phrase felt colder than the one before, failure to vacate. may result in removal of tenant possessions, property to be cleared for renovation. She imagined strangers walking through these rooms, pulling down the curtains she'd sewn, tearing up the carpet where her children had taken their first steps. She folded the letter carefully, sliding it into an envelope addressed to Lydia. But when she picked up the pen, her hand froze. What could she possibly write? "We might lose the house. Your father's sick, and I don't know where we'll go." No, she couldn't do that to them. They had families, deadlines, their own lives to manage. They didn't need this burden. Instead, she tucked the envelope into the drawer beside the unpaid utility bill and turned off the light. Harold was already asleep in the bedroom, his breathing uneven, the oxygen machine clicking softly. She stood in the doorway, grateful and afraid. 10 days. It didn't sound real, and yet every tick of the clock made it closer. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that this was how it began. The slow unraveling of a life that had seemed so steady. And though she tried to silence it, she knew the voice was right. The knock came late in the morning, sharp and deliberate, as if the visitor already knew what his answer would be. Martha wiped her hands on her apron and glanced toward the window. A man stood on the porch, tall, and neatly pressed his gray suit, catching the pale October light. His shoes gleamed against the worn wooden boards, and his polished shoes caught the light as he adjusted his tie. He smiled when he saw her, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mrs. Ellison?" he asked. She hesitated, then opened the screen door halfway. "Yes, I'm Charles Grady. I'm with Silver Pine Holdings. We're the new owners of this property." He spoke with the confidence of someone used to people listening. His voice was smooth, polished, but there was something faintly mechanical beneath it, like a salesman reading from memory. Martha's throat went dry. "I already received your letter," she said. "I've been trying to reach someone. We just need more time." Grady shook his head with polite finality. "I'm afraid there isn't much flexibility, ma'am. This neighborhood is scheduled for redevelopment under the Cedar Falls Renewal Project. You've probably heard about it." "Renewal?" Harold's voice came from behind her. He had wheeled himself into the doorway, his posture straight despite the tremor in his hands. That's a generous word for tearing people's lives apart. Grady's smile stayed fixed. "Mr. Ellison, I assure you this will improve the entire area. The Silver Pine townhomes will bring in new jobs and new infrastructure. You'll find better accommodations elsewhere, and we're offering a modest relocation bonus for tenants who leave early." "We're not tenants," Harold said firmly. "We're residents. This is our home." Grady's gaze flicked briefly over Harold's wheelchair, then back to his face. "It's a house, sir. A structure. You've had the privilege of living here for many years, and we appreciate that. But progress doesn't stop for sentiment." Martha felt her pulse in her throat. "We've paid rent on time every month," she said, "for nearly 40 years. That must count for something." Grady tilted his head as if considering her point. "It counts as history, Mrs. Ellison. But history can't pay for repairs, can it? These old buildings are out of code, the wiring's a hazard, and the city has approved demolition. You'll see it's for the best. A fresh start." Harold leaned forward slightly, his fingers gripping the armrests until his knuckles whitened. "You talk about fresh starts like it's easy," he said quietly. "For you, it's a contract. For us, it's everything we've got left." Grady's eyes softened a fraction, though the sympathy looked practiced. "I understand this is emotional, sir, but my hands are tied. My company's already invested millions. Construction begins next month." He reached into his jacket and produced a cream-colored business card, sliding it neatly onto the small table beside the door. "If you have questions, that's my direct number." The card gleamed under the porch light, embossed in silver letters. Charles Grady, Vice President of Redevelopment, Silver Pine Holdings. Martha stared at it, but didn't move. The faint smell of his cologne lingered in the air, something expensive, sharp. Grady glanced around the porch at the cracked paint, the flower pots lined neatly by the railing. "You've kept the place in remarkable shape," he said. "My mother had curtains like these once. You don't see craftsmanship like this anymore." His voice softened, almost kind, before he straightened again. "Still, the future has to come through here eventually. The sooner we can move forward, the smoother this will be for everyone." "Everyone," Harold repeated. "You mean investors, not people?" Grady gave a thin smile, same difference. Then, with the efficiency of a man concluding a meeting, he adjusted his cufflinks and turned to leave. "You'll have official notice from our attorneys by Friday. I'd encourage you to start looking now. It's a competitive market." He stepped down from the porch, the sound of his shoes crisp against the pavement. Martha stood frozen, one hand clutching the door frame, watching as he crossed to a sleek black sedan parked at the curb. The car's engine purred to life, smooth and unhurried, fading down the street. Harold exhaled slowly, his shoulders sinking. "That's him," he said. "That's the man who decides where we sleep." Martha closed the door gently, locking it out of habit, though she knew locks meant little now. She looked down at the card on the table. The silver lettering caught the light again, a cruel shimmer against the fading wood grain. Harold wheeled himself back toward the living room, his movements slower than before. "They'll take this place apart, piece by piece," he muttered. "They'll turn it into something sterile, something that doesn't remember us." Martha bent to pick up the card, her fingers trembling. She turned it over once, twice, as if expecting a message on the back. There was nothing. Only the name, the title, the promise of inevitability. The house creaked softly in the autumn breeze, the same sound it had made for decades. But now it felt different, like the house itself knew what was coming. Martha placed the card in the drawer beside the letter and closed it, pressing her hand against the cool surface, as though she could hold everything still just a little longer. 2 mornings later, Martha opened the door to find 3 men in matching navy jackets standing on the porch. Their truck idled by the curb, the Silver Pine Holdings logo gleaming on its side. The tallest of them gave a polite nod. "Inspection," he said simply, holding up a clipboard. "Routine safety review for redevelopment properties." Martha gripped the doorframe. "We weren't told about this." "You were notified," the man replied without looking up, flipping through a stack of papers. "Section 4, subsection 9. Access for property evaluation." He said it like he'd said it 100 times before. Behind him, one of the others was already snapping photos of the siding, crouching to photograph the base of the porch rail. "We're just doing our job," he added. Martha wanted to tell them to leave, to come back with permission, but her voice caught. She stepped aside, letting them pass. They moved through the house like surveyors on a clock, measuring walls, testing faucets, tapping on the old plaster with metal tools. One of them scribbled notes on a pad, murmuring about moisture damage and structural wear. The sound of it made her stomach twist. Harold sat in his wheelchair by the kitchen doorway, his jaw tight. "Be careful with that ramp," he warned as one man approached it. "I built that myself." The worker bent down, tugging at the wood. "Doesn't look up to code," he said. "We have to flag it as temporarily unsafe for liability, and removal will be scheduled only after you vacate. That ramp's been there 15 years, Harold snapped. "It's never hurt anyone." The man straightened, expression blank. "Not my call, sir." Martha could see Harold's hands trembling on the armrests. She moved quickly to his side, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Please," she said quietly. "He needs that ramp." The worker peeled a bright warning sticker from his pad and pressed it onto the railing, "Temporarily unsafe, do not use." The sound echoed through the yard. By afternoon, the men were gone, leaving muddy footprints and a yellow notice taped to the front door, "Preliminary safety evaluation completed, pending review." Martha tore it down, but the glue left a square shadow she couldn't wash away. The next day, another group arrived, different faces, same jackets. They checked the pipes, the foundation, the attic. One climbed the fence to inspect the roof. Each visit came without warning, and each time Martha's protests were met with the same rehearsed courtesy, "Just procedure, ma'am." She canceled Harold's physical therapy session, afraid to leave the house unattended. Every time she turned away, there was someone at a window or on the porch, clipboard in hand. The house no longer felt like theirs. It felt borrowed, surrounded under surveillance. By Thursday, even the neighbors had grown wary. Mrs. Crenshaw from next door whispered through the hedge, "They're doing it to everyone, dear. They come in, they find something wrong, and then it's over." Her words hung in the air, heavy as the clouds rolling over Cedar Falls. That evening, Martha sat beside Harold, As he tried to eat soup, his breathing labored. "They took the ramp," he said between coughs. "Can't even get out on my own now." She reached for his hand. "We'll put it back when this ends." "It's not going to end," he muttered, eyes distant. "They're pushing us out." Martha wanted to tell him he was wrong, but the words refused to form. Outside, another truck slowed near the curb, its headlights sweeping across the windows. Harold flinched at the sound of its engine. "I can't even rest in my own house," he said softly. "Feels like they're waiting for us to disappear." She pressed his hand tighter, willing her own fear to stay hidden. When the truck finally drove off, the silence it left behind felt no safer. Later that night, rain began to fall again, steady and cold. The roof creaked, and water dripped through the corner of the sunroom where the ceiling had cracked years ago. Martha placed a bowl beneath the leak and sat on the floor beside it, listening to the rhythmic plink of rainwater. Harold was in the bedroom, coughing deep in his chest. Every sound in the house seemed amplified, the ticking clock, the wind against the siding, the faint rattle of Harold's breathing. Through the front window, the new sign glimmered in the rainlight, "Property under inspection, Silver Pine Holdings." It swung gently from a metal post, creaking as the wind pushed it back and forth. Martha wrapped her shawl tighter, watching it move. Each sway felt like a countdown. She imagined the men returning tomorrow or the next day, each visit stripping away another piece of what made this place home. She leaned her head against the cold window pane and closed her eyes, whispering to no one in particular. "Please just let us have a little time." The house answered with a weary groan of settling wood. Rain fell in steady sheets, soaking the street and making the trees shimmer like glass. Martha stood by the kitchen window, clutching a damp towel, staring at the puddles forming along the driveway. She hadn't slept. Harold had been coughing through the night, his chest rattling like an old engine struggling to start. When the knock came, she already knew who it was. The sound was heavy, insistent, official. She opened the door to find a woman in a dark raincoat standing beside two county deputies. The woman held a clipboard and wore the expression of someone who had done this too many times. "Mrs. Ellison," she asked. "I'm Karen O'Donnell, property manager for Silver Pine Holdings. I'm here to oversee today's transfer." "Transfer," Martha repeated, her voice breaking. "We were told we had until next week." "The timeline was adjusted," Karen said, flipping through her papers. "A writ of possession has been posted by the court, and the crew is already on the way to clear the premises. I'm afraid it has to happen today." The words didn't make sense at first. "My husband is ill," Martha said, struggling to keep her voice calm. "He can't be moved in this weather." "I understand," the woman replied mechanically, "but our order is final." Behind her, one of the security guards shifted uncomfortably. Martha's hands trembled. "Please at least give us an hour," she whispered. "1 hour. He's resting." The woman hesitated just long enough for Martha to see a flicker of guilt cross her face. Then she nodded once. 60 minutes, Mrs. Ellison. I can give you that." She turned to the deputies. "Wait by the truck." Martha closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. She could hear Harold calling weakly from the living room. "Who was it? It's time," she said quietly, kneeling beside him. "They're here." He looked toward the window where the rain streaked down in silver threads. "I thought we had a few more days," he murmured. "So did I." She began gathering what she could: medication bottles, photographs, the small wooden box that held their marriage license, and Lydia's first report card. Each item felt like a piece of a life that was being erased. From next door, the gate creaked open, and Mrs. Crenshaw appeared, her umbrella trembling in the wind. "I saw the truck," she said, her voice thick with outrage. "They can't just do this." Martha forced a faint smile. "They can, and they are." The older woman stepped inside, carrying a thermos and a bundle of towels. "I made soup. You'll need something warm." Then she lowered her voice. "Grady did the same thing to the Millers last month. They barely had time to get their cat out." Martha's hands paused on the box she was packing. "Did anyone help them?" Mrs. Crenshaw shook her head. No one dared. Outside, the sound of the truck grew louder. The rain made their voices distant, muffled, as if the world itself was trying not to hear. Harold tried to push himself upright, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair. "Leave it," Martha said gently. "I'll do it?" "No," he insisted, his voice hoarse. "I won't be carried out of my own house." She could see the strain in his face, the determination that had once built a home, now holding on to the last of his dignity. Together, they rolled through the hallway past walls covered in fading family photos. He stopped by the doorway to the kitchen. "We planted the lilacs that spring," he said, his gaze far away. "They'll bloom without us next year." The workers entered moments later, their boots dripping on the tile. "We'll be careful," one of them said softly, avoiding her eyes. It didn't matter. The sound of boxes being stacked and drawers opening filled the house like thunder. Martha moved mechanically, answering questions, signing papers, watching as strangers handled her memories. When the last piece of furniture was loaded, the property manager approached with a clipboard. "I need your signature here," she said. Martha signed without looking. Outside, the truck door slammed shut. Harold sat motionless in his chair, water dripping from his coat collar. His eyes were closed, his lips barely moving. "Don't look back, Martha," he whispered. "Just keep me upright." She nodded, though tears blurred her vision. Mrs. Crenshaw held an umbrella over them, while two workers lifted Harold's wheelchair carefully down the porch steps and toward the car, her hands shaking. "You'll stay with someone tonight?" she asked. "We'll figure it out," Martha said. The street looked different now, emptier, wider, as if the rain had washed away everything familiar. Across the road, the Silver Pine sign gleamed under the gray sky, future site of Silver Pine townhomes. Martha felt Harold shiver beside her. She adjusted his blanket and turned the key in the ignition. The car sputtered before catching the wipers, dragging slow arcs across the windshield. She looked one last time at the house, the window where she had watched the seasons change for 4 decades. Then she put the car in gear. The rain blurred the world into streaks of gray and silver as they pulled away from Birch Avenue, the home shrinking in the rearview mirror until it was only a shadow behind the mist. The rain followed them out of Birch Avenue as if it refused to let them go. By the time Martha merged onto the main road, her hands were trembling on the wheel, her vision blurred by fatigue and water. The wipers squeaked against the glass, barely keeping up. Harold sat slumped in the passenger seat, his blanket soaked despite her efforts. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. "We'll stop soon," she promised. "Somewhere warm." They tried the first motel near the interstate, a narrow building with flickering neon. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up when Martha entered. "Cash only," she said quickly, placing a few folded bills on the counter. The man glanced at them, then shook his head. "We need a card for deposit. Policy." "Please," she whispered, "my husband's sick." His face didn't change. "There's a shelter downtown." He handed her a brochure as if that made it better. Outside, the rain came down harder. They drove for hours from one place to another, each door closing just as politely as the last. Every time she said the word oxygen, the conversation ended with the same careful sympathy. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we can't accommodate medical needs." By midnight, the dashboard light glowed dimly red. The fuel gauge hovered near empty. Martha pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour supermarket, the kind that never really slept. Fluorescent light spilled across the asphalt, glinting off the rain. She parked under one of the lamps and turned off the engine to save what was left of the fuel. With the engine off, the small cabin light and radio stayed on, slowly draining the battery as the night stretched. Harold stirred, his voice barely audible. "Where are we? Just resting," she said. "You need to sleep. It's cold." She reached into the back seat for another blanket, tucking it around him, then rubbed his hands between hers. His fingers felt cold and dry like paper. The night stretched endlessly. Cars came and went. Somewhere, a delivery truck unloaded crates with a metallic clang. Martha watched droplets slide down the windshield, distorting the world outside into shifting shapes. She tried not to think about the house, the ticking clock, the smell of coffee, the sound of rain against their old roof. When dawn came, it didn't bring light, only a dull grayness that pressed down on everything. She started the car again, hoping the heater might still work. The air that came through was lukewarm. Harold coughed a deep, tearing sound that made her flinch. "Maybe we should call Lydia," he said between breaths. "She'd come?" Martha hesitated. "She's working, and she's in another state. It's only temporary, Harold. We'll find something." "Temporary," he repeated softly, as if testing the word. They spent the next 2 days chasing rumors of help. A church on Maple Street offered food, but no beds. The community center's list was full. 12 calls, 12 refusals. Each voice on the other end sounded kind, but kindness couldn't open locked doors. By the second night, the car battery was nearly dead. The dashboard light flickered weakly before going dark. The world outside the windshield had turned into a curtain of rain. Martha leaned back in her seat, exhaustion pressing against her chest. Harold slept fitfully, his breath whistling through the oxygen tube that connected to a half-empty tank. She counted each inhale, terrified of what might happen when the tank ran out. On the third evening, the storm intensified. The supermarket lights dimmed, and the parking lot emptied until only their car remained. Martha stared at the gas gauge, knowing there wasn't enough to keep the heater running. "We can't stay here," she whispered to herself. "Not another night." She started the car anyway, coaxing it down the slick roads toward the city's edge. The radio crackled to life with fragments of a weather warning. Flash floods near the river road, closures stay indoors. She almost laughed. "Stay indoors," she muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. They turned onto Riverbend Avenue, where the streetlights flickered weakly. Ahead stood a small bus stop shelter, half-covered empty. Martha pulled over and parked beside it. The engine sputtered once before dying completely. She didn't try to restart it. The rain was relentless now, pounding the roof like gravel. She helped Harold out of the car, wrapping the blanket around him, guiding his wheelchair under the metal awning. The wind carried a faint chill that seeped into her bones. She sat beside him on the bench, water dripping from her hair. His head rested against her shoulder. "It's just for tonight," she said softly. "Tomorrow we'll find somewhere better." "Tomorrow," he echoed faintly. She pulled her sweater tighter, her hands shaking as she adjusted his oxygen line. The tank hissed quietly, a small reminder of time slipping away. Across the street, a lonely traffic light blinked through the storm. Everything felt suspended, like the world had paused just long enough for them to disappear unnoticed. Harold's breathing steadied slightly, and she brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "Just one more night," she whispered. "Then the sun will come." The words drifted away with the rain. She leaned back against the cold metal bench, eyes open, watching the endless water fall. The arrivals hall was alive with chatter and rolling suitcases, the air tinged with the scent of coffee and rain-soaked coats. Lydia Ellison checked her watch as she stepped off the plane, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The digital clock read 10:42 a.m., just enough time to pick up the rental car and surprise her father for his 72nd birthday. She had even packed the small cedar box he'd built her when she was 12, planning to give it back, polished and restored. Full circle, she thought, smiling faintly. "Lydia." She turned startled to see her younger brother Mark waving from across the terminal, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder rain jacket, unzipped. "You've got to be kidding me," she said, laughing as he reached her. "What are you doing here, Dad's birthday?" he replied, grinning. "You same." Before they could say more, another voice called out. "Well, I'll be damned, it's a reunion." June appeared from the crowd, her leather satchel bouncing against her hip, her hair streaked with blue at the ends as defiant as ever. The three siblings stared at one another in disbelief before bursting into laughter, drawing glances from travelers rushing past. "3 flights same day," Mark said. Mom would call it divine timing. Or fate with a sense of humor, June added. They decided to share a rental. Lydia driving, Mark navigating June, wedged between them in the back seat with her sketchbook balanced on her knees. Rain streaked the windshield as they left the airport behind the wipers, thudding a steady rhythm. Conversation flowed easily at first Lydia's latest project in Denver, Mark's students preparing for finals, June's gallery job that wasn't quite paying the bills. But beneath their laughter lingered something unspoken, the guilt of time passing too fast, of too many missed calls and postponed visits. "I can't believe it's been almost a year since Christmas," Lydia said. "Mom kept hinting they wanted us home this summer, and She didn't finish. Same Mark admitted. "We always think there'll be time." June leaned forward between the seats. "Well, we made it now. Dad's going to lose his mind when he sees all three of us walk through the door." Lydia smiled, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. "He deserves a good surprise." They turned onto Birch Avenue just after dusk. The rain had eased into a mist that caught the streetlights in soft halos. For a moment, everything looked as it always had, quiet, familiar, the street they'd biked down as children. But as the headlights swept across their parents' house, Lydia's breath caught. The ramp was gone, the flower pots gone, the windows dark. And standing in the center of the lawn where the old oak once cast its shade was a sign. Future site of Silver Pine Townhomes. The words glared under the rain like a verdict. "No," Lydia whispered, throwing the car into park. They stepped out into the damp air, staring in disbelief. "It can't be," Mark said. "They wouldn't just leave." June moved closer to the window, cupping her hands against the glass. Inside was emptiness, bare floors, no curtains, no sign of life. Her reflection stared back at her, hollow and distorted. "It's been cleared out," she said softly. "Completely." Lydia's voice trembled. "They didn't tell me anything. I talked to Mom 2 weeks ago. She sounded fine." "Maybe they moved," Mark offered, though even as he said it, the words sounded wrong. Lydia shook her head. "Without telling us, not them." A light flicked on in the house next door, and within moments the front door opened. Mrs. Crenshaw stood there, her robe tied hastily, her hair in curlers. When she saw them, her hand flew to her mouth. "The Ellison children," she said, her voice breaking. "Oh, thank God." They hurried toward her porch. "Mrs. Crenshaw, where are our parents?" Lydia asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The woman looked between them, eyes brimming with tears. "You didn't know what Mark demanded." She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "They were evicted 3 days ago. That man Grady, he owns half the block now. Raised the rent, said the place wasn't up to code. Evicted." June repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "Where did they go?" Mrs. Crenshaw swallowed hard. "Your mother said they were heading to Ohio to stay with your father's brother." Lydia frowned. "Uncle Thomas." "Yes, Thomas," the woman said quickly. Then her voice faltered. "But didn't he pass years ago?" "He died in 1999, Mark said flatly. The porch light flickered, throwing shadows across their faces. Then why would she say that June, asked, her voice cracking. Mrs. Crenshaw shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I think she didn't want me to worry." They packed the car, said it was just for a few days. Lydia felt her chest tighten, panic rising like a wave. Did anyone see which way they went? "Toward the highway," Mrs. Crenshaw said. "It was raining hard. I offered to help, but your mother said no. She was proud. Always proud." The street was silent except for the wind rustling the empty branches. The three siblings stood in the drizzle, staring at the hollow shell of their childhood home, realizing too late how fragile their parents' quiet strength had been. The house behind them stood silent, a hollow monument to everything they had missed. Rain pooled on the sidewalk as Lydia's phone buzzed endlessly, with calls to hospitals, shelters, police stations. Each voice on the other end said the same words: no record, no admission, no incident filed. It was as if their parents had been erased. Mark paced the porch, his jacket soaked through. "We're wasting time," he said. "They could be anywhere." "They wouldn't go far," Lydia murmured, her mind racing. "Not with Dad's condition. He needs oxygen refills. They'd stay near the bus routes, somewhere public." June, who had been rifling through the box of papers Mrs. Crenshaw had saved from the eviction, suddenly froze. "Wait," she said, holding up a folded scrap of paper. The ink was faint, but legible: Bus Route 22 Riverbend. Lydia stared at it, recognition dawning. Riverbend Avenue. That's near the river, the hospital line. Then that's where we start, Mark said. Within minutes, they were back in the car, windshield wipers thudding as the rain thickened. The streetlights blurred into streaks of gold and silver. Lydia drove knuckles white on the steering wheel, her heart hammering so loudly she could barely hear the engine. June tracked their progress on her phone, calling out intersections. Next stop's Harlow Street. There's a shelter near there. They checked every bus stop, every bench, every shadowed corner. At each stop, Lydia slowed, scanning through the rain. At the third stop, they found only a pair of soggy newspapers. At the fifth, an abandoned grocery cart filled with rainwater. By midnight, the city seemed endless, an ocean of wet pavement and empty shelters. What if they kept moving? June asked quietly from the back seat. Then we keep looking, Lydia replied. We don't stop. Her voice was steady, but her throat burned with exhaustion. They reached Riverbend Avenue after 1 in the morning. The road curved along the flood wall, lined with flickering streetlights and shuttered storefronts. The last bus had long since passed its digital sign, still glowing faintly at the distant terminal. That's the end of the line, Mark said, pointing ahead. Let's check it. The car rolled to a stop beside the shelter, a small metal awning with peeling paint barely shielding the bench beneath it. The light above flickered like a heartbeat. Lydia stepped out first. The rain had softened to a drizzle, but the air was sharp with cold. Her shoes splashed in puddles as she moved closer, scanning the shadows. Then she saw it. A wheelchair. Old familiar. The plaid blanket folded neatly across its seat. Her breath caught. Oh God, she whispered. Mark was right behind her, his flashlight cutting through the dark. Lydia over there. Under the awning, 2 figures huddled together. One sat slumped in the chair, head tilted against the metal frame. The other was curled beside him, her gray hair plastered to her face, her arms stretched protectively across his chest. The blanket covered them both. Mom June's voice broke the night as she ran forward, slipping on the wet pavement. She fell to her knees beside the bench, reaching for the frail woman's shoulder. Martha stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. For a heartbeat, she looked dazed, unsure if the vision before her was dream or memory. Then recognition came. Lydia! Her voice was barely audible, rough as wind over gravel. Lydia dropped beside her, taking her mother's hand. It's me, Mom. We're here. You're safe now. Tears mingled with the rain on her cheeks. Mark leaned over Harold, checking his pulse with trembling fingers. Dad? The old man's lips moved, forming the faintest smile, his eyes opened just enough to meet his son's. Told your mother, he whispered the words thin as air. I knew the rain would bring them home. June sobbed, pressing her forehead against Martha's knee. Lydia pulled off her coat and wrapped it around her mother's shoulders. We're calling an ambulance, she said, fumbling for her phone. No, Martha murmured weakly. We're fine, just cold. Her lips were pale, her hands trembling. Mark met Lydia's eyes. She's not fine. Neither of them are. Within minutes, the sound of sirens cut through the night. Red and blue lights spilled across the wet pavement, turning the rain into shards of color. Paramedics rushed in with blankets and oxygen tanks. As they worked, Martha clutched Lydia's sleeve. We didn't want to worry you, she whispered. Lydia's throat tightened. You should have called. We would have come. Martha's eyes filled with tears. We thought we could manage. We were wrong. The paramedics lifted Harold onto a stretcher, his hand still reaching for Martha's. Lydia guided her mother's trembling fingers to his, letting them intertwine once more. As the gurney doors closed, the first pale hint of dawn broke through the clouds, brushing the horizon with muted gold. The rain slowed to a mist, and for the first time in days, the sky began to clear. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and rain-soaked coats, the kind of smell that clung to every hallway. Machines hummed softly beside Harold's bed. Lydia sat by his side, her fingers wrapped around his hand, afraid to let go even for a moment. The doctor, a young man with tired eyes, stood at the foot of the bed, reviewing the chart. You got him here just in time, he said quietly. Another 6 hours, and we'd be having a very different conversation. Lydia swallowed hard. He's strong, she managed. He's been through worse. The doctor gave her a sympathetic look before moving on. Mark and June stood by the window, watching the gray sky lighten outside. None of them had slept. Martha sat in a chair wrapped in a hospital blanket, her eyes fixed on Harold's breathing. He always said he could handle the cold, she whispered half to herself. But I never thought it would come to this. For the next 3 days, they took turns sitting with him, spoon-feeding soup, adjusting his oxygen, whispering small stories to keep him tethered to the world. When the color finally began to return to his face, Lydia felt something shift inside her, a fragile thread of anger winding tighter with every breath he took. After Harold was moved from ICU to recovery, she went back to the short-term studio near the hospital and opened her laptop. She wanted answers. Hours turned into days as she scoured property records, legal filings, redevelopment permits. The more she read, the clearer the pattern became. Grady's company had filed urgent code violation reports on at least 12 properties, all signed by the same inspector. But the signature W. Kessler appeared identical on every report down to the pressure of the pen. Lydia compared the documents side by side, her pulse quickening. The inspector had retired a year earlier. Forgery, she whispered. She printed the files, spreading them across the table like puzzle pieces. When she showed Mark and June, their disbelief quickly turned to outrage. He falsified the inspections, Mark said. That's how he forced the evictions. We need to take this public, June added. People have to know. Mark nodded. I'll call the local paper. They'll run it. The next morning, he met with a reporter from the Cedar Falls Gazette, a young journalist eager for a story. She interviewed them, photographed the empty lot where their home once stood, and promised the article would appear in Sunday's edition. But when Sunday came, the story was gone. In its place was a feature about the promise of urban renewal, praising Silver Pine Holdings for revitalizing the neighborhood. Mark called the reporter in disbelief. Her voice trembled. I'm sorry, Mr. Ellison. My editor pulled it. Silver Pine is one of our biggest sponsors. There's nothing I can do. The line went dead, leaving Mark staring at the phone. They're untouchable, he said bitterly. They think they are, Lydia replied. But they're not. That night, June opened her laptop. If the paper won't tell the truth, we will. She set up a camera on the dining table of Lydia's small apartment. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp. She began to speak, her voice steady but raw. My name is June Ellison. 3 weeks ago, my parents were evicted from their home of 39 years by Silver Pine Holdings. My father nearly died. Here's what really happened. She showed the forged documents, the eviction notice, the photographs of Harold in his wheelchair under the rain. She didn't cry until the end, when she said all they wanted was to grow old in peace. When she uploaded the video, none of them expected what came next. Within 24 hours, it had 50,000 views. By the end of the week, it had millions. Strangers commented from across the country, sharing their own stories of eviction and loss. Hashtags appeared, petitions circulated. News outlets picked it up, though some still avoided naming Silver Pine directly. Then came the messages, 3 families from Cedar Falls who claimed the same thing had happened to them. Lydia contacted each of them, collecting statements, gathering proof. Together, they filed a formal complaint to the State Housing Board. But it wasn't enough. They needed someone with reach, someone who couldn't be silenced. That's when the email arrived. Patricia Liu, senior correspondent, National News Network. She had seen June's video. I want to tell your story, it read, all of it. 2 days later, Patricia arrived with a small film crew. She was in her 50s, her hair streaked with gray, her expression composed but kind. You've started something, she told them. People are listening. Let's make sure they can't look away. Cameras rolled as Lydia recounted the eviction. Mark described the censorship, and June sat beside her parents' hospital bed, holding their hands. Patricia's team documented everything, the forged reports, the testimonies, the empty street where Birch Avenue once breathed with life. When the broadcast finally aired, it wasn't just a story. It was an indictment. The world saw Martha's trembling smile as she said, "We thought we were invisible." They saw Harold's fragile voice declaring no one should lose their home to greed. The floodgates opened. Calls poured in from advocacy groups, lawyers, ordinary citizens offering help. Silver Pine Holdings could no longer hide behind silence. After 6 months of investigation, prosecutors filed charges, and months later the trial began. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, their cameras flashing as the crowd murmured beneath the gray sky. The world had already judged Charles Grady, but now the law would speak. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with quiet tension. Grady sat beside his lawyers, his once polished confidence dulled by sleepless nights and public outrage. Across the aisle sat the Ellisons, their hands clasped together, their faces calm but resolute. Harold wore a dark suit that hung a little loose on his frame. His breathing was steady now, though each step he took with his cane was measured and slow. When the judge called him to the stand, the room fell silent. He took his oath with trembling hands, the microphone amplifying the rasp in his voice. "Mr. Ellison," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court what happened to you and your wife last October?" Harold adjusted his glasses, eyes steady on the jury. "We were told our home was unsafe," he said. "But it wasn't the house that failed. It was the people who saw us as numbers instead of neighbors." He paused, his voice softening. "When we lost that house, I thought we'd lost everything. But I was wrong. What really holds a home together isn't brick or wood. It's love. It's the people who share it." A hush fell over the courtroom. Even Grady, seated stiffly at his table, shifted his gaze towards the floor. The judge nodded once, then signaled for Harold to step down. Lydia watched her father return to his seat, her eyes glistening. The verdict came 2 days later. The charges fraud, elder abuse, and federal housing violations were read aloud in a voice so steady it almost masked the weight of them. "Charles Grady," the judge said, "for your deliberate deceit and harm caused to multiple families, this court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison. You are further ordered to pay restitution toward the Ellison Foundation for seniors to be established under the supervision of the plaintiffs." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Grady closed his eyes briefly, as if the words themselves were a physical blow. Martha reached for Harold's hand, squeezing gently. There was no triumph in her face, only quiet relief, a sense that the world had at last remembered fairness. Outside, as cameras surrounded them, Lydia spoke calmly to reporters. "This isn't just about us," she said. "It's about every family who's ever been told they don't matter. We can't give back what was taken, but we can make sure it doesn't happen again." The months that followed were filled with rebuilding not the house, but something deeper. Lydia registered the Ellison Foundation for Seniors, a nonprofit offering legal and housing assistance for displaced elders. The first grant came from supporters who had watched June's video and wanted to help. Mark volunteered as outreach coordinator, balancing his teaching job with late-night meetings. June designed the foundation's logo, 2 hands forming the shape of a small home-warm light glowing between them. Each letter of their family name curved beneath like a quiet promise. The spring that followed was gentle and bright. The Ellisons moved into a modest apartment at Lakewood Gardens, a senior community surrounded by willow trees and walking paths. The rent was fair, the neighbors kind. Harold and Martha planted flowers on the small patio, lavender, lilac, and daisies, just like the old house. Martha's health improved slowly, her laughter returning in small bursts when Harold teased her about overwatering the plants. On weekends, the children visited. Lydia brought files for the foundation. Mark told stories from his classroom. June carried her camera everywhere, capturing the new life blooming around them. Sunday dinners became a ritual again, with laughter echoing through the apartment. One afternoon, June framed an old black and white photograph. Their home on Birch Avenue, taken decades ago, with Harold standing proudly beside the porch he built. She placed it on the living room shelf. Harold would often sit across from it in his armchair, the afternoon light resting gently on his face. "Do you miss it?" Lydia asked once. He smiled, eyes soft. "Not the walls," he said. "Just the time. But I like to think the house didn't disappear. It just moved in here." He pressed a hand to his chest. Martha, sitting beside him, nodded. "We carried it with us all along." Outside, the lilacs had begun to bloom. Their scent drifted through the open window, mingling with the faint hum of traffic and birdsong. For the first time in a long while, peace felt real, not borrowed. And though the world had changed around them, the Ellisons knew that home was not a place, but the bond that refused to break even through loss, even through rain. The photograph glowed softly in the fading light, a quiet reminder of what they had endured and of what they had found again. If this story moved you, take a moment to share it and subscribe so you won't miss the next one. I'd love to hear what you think. Which moment stayed with you the most, and where are you watching from tonight? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one.